Now, there was one last question that somebody put on the video page, and that was about why is theism so predominant in the modern age, and especially this kind of monotheism that's found in the Semitic religions of Abraham. So this Christianity, Muslim, and Judaism. So first we need to look at the evolution of spirituality and religion. And what is generally held is that in our early development, then along with that came a belief in animism. It's called polypsychism. So this notion that like all the rocks and trees and animals all have a spirit. And it's common to this day, and it's common in kind of tribal societies. And the idea is that as our kind of self-awareness evolved, right, we were like animals, and we were not self-aware. At some point, we started to develop this kind of linguistic way of thinking, semantics, grammar, and kind of these conceptual thinkings. And this conceptual thinking is seen to be this element that created this defiled dualism. And many people relate to the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to a kind of teaching on non-duality, that the natural state is this non-dual resting within God. And then when they ate from the tree of knowledge, the apple, and they blamed it on Eve, by the way. I'm not up on that. My theory on why they blame it on Eve is because women were responsible for cultivation. And so cultivation is really what has caused us to evolve in the world. But I'm not blaming women, right? Because we've benefited from our great mothers and their activities. Otherwise, we'd just be a bunch of, spear-chucking men going around killing each other. So without women, there would be no wisdom. And that's what is taught in the Buddha Dharma, actually. The woman symbolizes wisdom, and the man is method. So man's the one with the big club, that kind of brainless oaf going around smashing things on the head and trying to get what it wants. And woman is the one who inspires us towards wisdom. I think this is why, in the Bible, it's attributed to Eve, encouraging Adam to eat of the fruit of knowledge, because it's based on female activity that we've gained all of our kind of, our sort of technological advancement in the world. Without having created civilizations, we would never have gotten there. And so you see these earlier civilizations were matriarchal, and the gods were, mother gods. But anyway, it's too deep a topic. We can go into too much here. So we start to develop self-awareness. And at that point, then human beings were basically part of the food chain. We were kind of in the middle, right? It's not certain who would kill us. And even things like bugs and insects could be the cause of our death. And we were afraid of bears and tigers and all that. So as we started to become self-aware, then we started to identify our environment with this experience of self-awareness. So, for example, a tiger, there's no reason for us to believe that the tiger doesn't have the same ability to think as us. And so this polypsychism, or this kind of animism, was this belief that everything, rocks and trees, etc., had spirit. Now there's another thing I will add on to this, and this is from personal experience, and this is through meditation. And it's to do with understanding how we think and how the mind works. And that is for these primitive, let's say, tribal individuals, then they start to develop this self-awareness, so this idea of self, but they don't have this complex linguistic structures in order to make, statements. We don't have predicates like this subject-object dichotomy, like I am the actor doing an action on something else. We had no way of conceiving that because there was no language. We had no language models, right, basically. And so we started to develop self-awareness. And with that, for example, we were aware that fire is dangerous. But for a very primitive mind, this experience of seeing fire and this message, non-linguistic message of fire being dangerous, to that individual is basically like the fire speaking to them. That's the way we experience objects. We identify them, for us anyway, we'll sort of stare at our visualized object and we identify it as being a candle. Well, for them, they have no language model, but the thinking about that candle is a form of that candle expressing its essence to us. And so for me, I don't see it the same way as many philosophers, and anthropologists interpret it, as that we just sort of conceptually thought, well, these must have spirits as well. For me, it was a visceral experience. These things like trees and water and fire and tigers and those sort of things, kind of expressing their essential nature that we understood. Like thorns would be kind of angry, or a tiger. If we saw a tiger, we think, I might get eaten, but we might interpret that as, I'm going to eat you. So we see these kind of our environment as all being part of the environment, and also the environment as speaking to us directly. And I did read a paper many years ago about that suggested that our early thought came through to us as if we were being spoken to. So why did that change? Well, we moved into civilizations and human beings became kind of the top of the food chain. We started domesticating animals, we started controlling our environment, and then our basic perception of the world around us was no longer that we were just basically the same as the various different animals and things in the environment. We could be eaten, we could eat something else, we could have rocks fall on our head. We were now kind of in control of our environment, but also we developed these languages. They were very developed, Mesopotamian places like that. They had grammar and all kinds of things. They could explain complex ideas. And with that, then this role of equality with all the elements changed. And so what happened was, these, let's say, the spirit of water would then acquire a human god. So we have the god of water, the god of fire. And so the identity of these gods was then humanized, turned into a human being. And also this has got to be related to kind of government structures, the ways of ruling, how societies were controlled. And so we started to develop kind of more complex systems of interaction. Now eventually then monotheism came around, right? And we think it's like Akhenaten time, maybe 14th century BCE, something like that, a long time ago, right? The primary change at that time was that we started to have something like an emperor, Instead of having localized tribal groups, small kingdoms, working either in harmony or against each other to form larger governments, we started to see these kind of imperial rule, where there was something like a king. And you also see this in some of the polytheistic religions, where you'll have Zeus or something, Odin, you'll have a king of the gods. Well, eventually what is taught is that this king of the gods became the primary god, but it's kind of political as well. Because, especially with Akhenaten, then, what we have is that local communities associate with their own deity. We know this, right? To this very day, if you've been to India, then some communities their local deity will be Ganesh. And you go to another place and it'll be Hanuman, so it'll be monkey god, the elephant god, etc. So each community, their highest authority was their god figure, that was their principal god. It's not like it didn't accept other gods. But in the time of Akhenaten, there was this political change, socio-political change, in which you needed an emperor who had the final say. And I think this eventually led to the idea of monotheism. And it also was something that was sort of agreed more with our way of interpreting the universe. How do we answer this question? Where did the universe come from? And ultimately, then we need a creator god. If that creator god created everything, well, that god must be the god of everything. And so the other gods become lesser, and their influence starts to diminish. And also I see there's this political element, right? So it's very convenient if you associate with the one god, then everybody has to bow down to that god. And so if an emperor wants to have total control, then he needs to diminish the power of other kind of major deities. But this transition took a long time, right? I mean, something like maybe 2000 BC, then Zoroastrianism started. So it was still transforming up into that day. And to this very day, right? In India, then they're still polytheist. But certainly monotheism became more popular. Now, why has it spread? Well, again, the reasons might be more geopolitical than spiritual. I mean, I think people accept monotheism a lot more easily. And it's because these kind of metaphysical paradoxes are very difficult for people to understand. And this is something that Buddhism isn't very good at, because actually Buddhism is incredibly difficult to understand. In fact, you could say that most of the Buddhist followers, the most percentage of people who follow Buddhism aren't Buddhists. It's because they don't have the view that adheres to these 4 seals that signify the true Dharma that I've spoken about before. There's these 4 fundamental cornerstones of Buddhist belief, and if you don't have them, you ain't a Buddhist. So that means 90% of Buddhists aren't Buddhists. There's 300 million Buddhists in China, but almost none of them have a Buddhist view. To them, it's just a form of theism. And theism is far easier to understand and accept for intelligent, modern, educated people than the Buddhist tenet. The Buddhist tenet is incredibly difficult. It's the same with this sort of non-dual Vedanta, right? the non-dual Vedanta, which is so popular in the Western world, Neo-Vedanta, really popular in the Western world, but it's very small percentage of people in the Hindu tradition who follow this non-dual Vedanta, historically, traditionally, and to this very day. Most people follow the dual model. And that is also becoming very monotheistic in terms of the ultimate belief in Brahma as being the ultimate source. That's another huge topic. So anyway, I want to talk about why I see that especially the Semitic religions of Abraham, Christianity, Judaism, and the Muslim religion are so prevalent in these days. Now first we have to understand that within at least, probably in 50 years, then this Muslim religion will overtake Christianity in its expansion. And sadly, Buddhism is on decline. There's this slight increase in modern times in Buddhist followers, but that's largely due to China opening up again. And that will diminish. And the problem is that Buddhism teaches you to keep vows, so, that you should abandon the life of a layperson. So we're just going to diminish and disappear. But we've always been in the minority anyway. Like I say, it's very difficult to understand the Buddhist position. It's quite attractive to many people because I think it's all about love and peace. And that is a fundamental cornerstone of the Buddhist position. And certainly things like Christianity and these religions are taking off. There's like over 1 billion people, 1.6 billion people or something in Christianity, and the Muslim religion's almost there. But the reason why it's so prevalent to me is a geopolitical reason. If we look, then Christianity really took off when it became adopted in the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was like one of the hugest, most successful empires in human history. And in the early days, then Christians were persecuted, right? The Romans had a real problem with the Jews, and they had wars. They had something like a 70-year Jewish war, around the time of Christ and that sort of time. And so they were in great opposition to each other. And this is also part of the reason why Judaism has been suppressed. This is part of the root of this terrible anti-Semitism that we suffer from. When Rome expanded, really expanded, then with it took Christianity. It also spread Judaism, in fact. There are many Jews, for example, in the UK that came from the Roman Empire time. And then this continued during the Industrial Revolution, on the era of Enlightenment. So during the era of Enlightenment, then it was Western development of science and technology. On this was supported by a very strong church. In the early days, then there was very little separation from church and government. And so as Westerners started to conquer the entire world, with them they took Christianity. And it's similar with the Muslim tradition, because the Ottoman Empire was also very extensive and very powerful. And you'll see to this day that the places that remain kind of Islamic were places that were under the influence of the Ottoman Empire. And it's those borderlines where there was a kind of conflict. Places like Spain, for example, where they had Christianity, but they also had Judaism, and they also had these Islamic religions. There was a lot of conflict, and so things happened like the Inquisition and this sort of thing. Religious kind of prejudiced and anti-Semitism. It's interesting to note, though, that in the early days in North Africa, then Christianity, Islam, Judaism all lived in harmony together. People were neighbors, and they got together and discussed their religious differences in an attempt to further knowledge and understanding. And it was the same in this Gandhara, this kingdom around Afghanistan, Persia there. In the early days, then Buddhists and Muslims and Christians and everything got together in special meeting halls that were developed to discuss spirituality and philosophy, to further knowledge, They also discussed mathematics, for example. There was sort of mathematics, poetry, philosophy, spirituality were all kind of linked into a kind of synthesis, a form of art almost. And then somehow, through our these geopolitical conflicts, then we've become very polarized. And it's sad. And so that's something I really hope that I can promote on this channel, that this can be a platform for generating discourse. And why do we engage in discourse? Is to come to a greater understanding of our own position and the position of others. And if we can put ourselves in other people's shoes, see it from their perspective, then there will be more harmony in the world. And ultimately, then however much we advance scientifically, without the morality of religion, without spiritual knowledge, then the human race is doomed, to be quite frank. in a nihilistic world where consciousness is just a side effect of random evolution and the universe happened for no reason, then there is no reason for me to act in a virtuous way and also to avoid negativity. And that's kind of where we are now. And I don't really want to end on a sad note, but we need to think about these things. It's kind of your responsibility to develop spiritual knowledge and understanding. And by that, as I said, be an influence to others, to shine like a light of truth, love, and compassion. So anyway, I'm going to have to go. I've got to look after my mom and dad. It's getting late. And thank you so much for participating, joining in, listening, getting involved in the discussion. I appreciate you. You know, little by little, our small YouTube community is growing. And I hope we grow on a kind of ethical and virtuous basis. And that we're able to spread the light of love and compassion to all those we meet and that we influence. So at this point, let's dedicate any small virtue or merit that might have arisen from this interaction to the benefit of others and ultimately to seeking liberation from samsara. And then I'm going to try to keep doing these little discussions if you think they are of benefit. I mean, it's not for my benefit.